So let's start really simple. So I think that we are probably all aware that the plant-based food movement is seeing a lot of traction. You have companies like Impossible and Beyond Meat with high brand power entering the market. But when you dig down into the numbers, the reality is that not a lot of people are actually buying plant-based food. We're talking about it a whole lot. We're not buying it. And of the people who are buying it, a lot of people are not rebuying it. So they're trying it. It's not great, and they're not rebuying it. So we still have plant-based sitting in this early adopter phase if you think about a technology curve. And so Motif's whole reason for existence is to create craveable plant-based food. So I think we know that there's a lot of potential in plant-based food. There's a lot of health benefits to it. A lot of people want to eat less meat. They just don't know how, and the food doesn't taste good. And so Motif is an ingredient company. We're a B2B company, and our whole mission is to find technologies that really dramatically improve the taste and texture of plant-based foods. And that's a mix of high technology ingredients, and those have different challenges in terms of consumer acceptance and regulatory challenges. And then there are simple inventions and new and exciting technologies that aren't out there that we're looking to expose and bring to the market. The food industry has been particularly interesting during COVID because it's one of the industries that saw an explosion during COVID, right? As people were pantry loading and stocking up. And we were watching those numbers closely, like on an almost weekly basis to see what people were buying. And there was a period where plant-based meat saw this huge uptick because meat wasn't on the shelves because all the meat plants were cut down. You had almost 2 million new shoppers trialing the category who had never bought it before. And so for our business, what changed in terms of strategy was really, how do we tap into those opportunities? How do we grab the people who've entered this market and keep them there? And so because we're a B2B company, we're not selling a product to consumers, but it very quickly involved immediate conversations with our customers of how they were tackling this with their consumers and how we could speed up our innovation cycle to get new products to market faster, to capitalize on that interest that had shown up. And so that's really what changed for our strategy because the opportunity just grew, really.
You give us a couple of examples of not necessarily names, but the types of customers then that you deal with?
Yeah, and this really differs by category. So if we're thinking meat, we're really working with large brands who are putting out plant-based meat products, but we're also talking to meat producers and meat providers who want to enter the plant-based meat space for the first time. They're seeing value in it. There are a lot of these meat producers have talked about how plant-based meat is never going to take off, and now as they see it, they want to expand their portfolio. So we're working closely with them. In dairy, this can look a little bit different. Dairy is still a very emerging space for plant-based foods. And so we're talking to cheese producers globally because cheese is one of the highest produced dairy products. And so it's a mix of really brands and producers and factories that we're talking to about expanding their plant-based portfolios.
How would you describe what strategy is to our students?
I think at the very core and at the simplest level, it's discovering what your company is good at and does better than anybody else in the market and figuring out how to bring that to market effectively. And so that's a very simple way of putting it, but it drives a lot of their decisions. So once you decide what you're good at and what you want to do, it drives your resource allocation, how much time you're spending on different things. It drives who you're hiring. I think it's also important to set guardrails of what you want to do and what you're not going to do for short periods of time. And then the last piece of that is it's important to reevaluate that because the risk is that you just pick your guardrails and work towards them for a 10-year period and the market has changed around you and your guardrails are no longer relevant. But it's important to continually revisit those guardrails and see if they still make sense for the market. Are you still the best at what you think you're the best at? And if not, how do you pivot to capitalize on other opportunities? I think it's really exciting for the industry. And one of the pre-questions that had been shared was about how strategy has been changing. And I really think a lot about how collaborations in the industry are a lot more prevalent than they have been in the past. I think in the past, companies really stayed in their lanes and were really all about ignoring and beating their competitors. But with plant-based, I'm seeing a lot more joint collaborations, which I think are great because with Beyond and Pepsi, you have Pepsi's distribution network, you have Pepsi's trust in their brand, you have Beyond's brand power as well, and marrying them can only be, to me, a good thing for the industry. And they'll challenge each other in different ways. Beyond and Pepsi will challenge themselves because their priorities are a little bit different. And that's something that even at Motif, we're thinking about. How do we collaborate with other players in the industry to join forces and have a joint perspective on where the industry goes and ensure consumer trust all the way through?
And so is there, Audrey asked, well, is there some new technology that might be driving these collaborations or, and if so, what is that technology? Should we expect to see more of these collaborations going forward?
I from comments, so I should say I can't be too transparent about technologies because for, at least at a startup, it's a lot of proprietary information. But I do think we're going to see more collaborations from the conversations I've been seeing so far, and that's because there are lots of little startups working on different pieces of the problem, right? So you will have a company in Singapore working on scaffolding and cell-based meat, and you'll have somebody else working on texture, and you'll have somebody else working on taste and flavor systems. And I think that we're starting to see a congregation of those where people are like, well, if I put mine with yours and yours, we'll actually have an infinitely better product versus competing on different elements of the product. So cell-based meat, which Motif isn't currently working on, but might be, felt like a distant, faraway dream for a long time. But I think with a lot of companies joining forces, we're going to see it hitting market a lot sooner than maybe some of us had expected. And the first approval just came through in Singapore for lab-grown chicken or lab-grown meat. And I think that's going to be set off a snowball effect in the next 3 to 5 years.
Can you foresee some challenges, or have you experienced challenges in terms of strategy and governance that comes from these new collaborations?
There's governance of the collaboration is crucial. What both parties are putting in, what they're getting out, what they're responsible for. That's part of it. But I think a bigger challenge is around consumer acceptance. This is something we've been thinking a lot, and that's a big challenge we face at Motif in terms of our strategy is, are consumers comfortable with this level of technology, and how are we transparent enough with them that they understand the technology and feel safe about it, but aren't so transparent that they're like confused and walk away from it as a result. And this is why I think the collaborations are important, so that the industry can have a joint message to consumers versus everybody stating it differently and consumers feeling just very confused and as a result scared. I think I'm really excited about how Gen Z are shopping, because they're shopping differently than I think any other generation has. And I think they're really going to change the way we think about technology and food, because the comfort level is completely different. And as a result, the acceptance is very different. It's the baby boomers holding us back. No.
Slow us down. And maybe one more, Nancy. Sorry, a lot of great questions from the students. Andrew, I think Andrew's question nicely builds on that. One of the reasons plant-based has gained traction is due to the reduction in greenhouse emissions caused by livestock, such as cows. How much of a plant-based wave and this Gen Z push is attributable to turning towards becoming a more green economy?
Yeah, I think that's the easy message, right? I think the easy message is it's environmental messaging, it's animal welfare, it's sustainability, which I think is certainly the push for the start of the movement. But again, I think about it on this technology curve, right? So who are the early adopters and innovators? Who are the late adopters? The late adopters aren't as invested in sustainability and animal welfare. That's the reality of it. And so I think sustainability only answers the first part of the question, but to get to the broader market, taste and cost ultimately are key. The people who are in the early adopter phase are willing to compromise on taste. They're willing to pay more because it meets their values. But if we want it to be a broader movement, it has to address the taste and cost concerns that have been brought up.
So Brianna wanted to know if you feel your psychology background impacts your ability to sort of spot trends or implement successful strategies.
That's a great question. It probably does. Now that I think about it, so a lot of the classes I took were on social psychology and behavior, which then lent itself really well to behavioral economics in business school. And still, like, a lot of the books that I read are about like how do you drive people's thinking. I think it definitely helps me pressure test findings that I'm looking at. So think about like the clickbait headline, 25% of consumers said X. I'm like, what does this mean? Who did they ask? What was the cross-section of people? And it really pushes me to actually sanity check the trends that I'm hearing, because there's so much information out there.
You mentioned Gen Z buying habits. So let's follow that behavioral piece along. What are the buying habits specifically you see within the Gen Z population?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Gen Z, Gen Z. That's been a big one since I came to the U.S. I think I'm going to say Gen Z, but they have a lot more buying power than we gave them credit for. And they actually drive their household's purchase habits more than we expected. So I think when you found millennials in the same place, they might have wanted to buy something, but they didn't necessarily have influence over what their household was buying. But with Gen Z, you're seeing with Gen Z excitement around plant-based food, they're able to convert their family or their household to buying more plant-based meat or milk, and that becoming a part of their diet. And they're finding hacks or tricks on how to use those in daily cooking and introducing those to their households. So it's actually driving change across different demographics just because of their own interest in the food.
You mentioned the breadth in players, as well as trying to get a pulse on trends. Daniel asks, are Twitter, Google good places to find or understand trends within the food space? If so, do you monitor this data to determine market opportunities? If not, what are some other sources of information that you use to identify these opportunities?
That's a great question. So to my earlier point about triangulating different data sources, social is extraordinarily important. We do a lot of social listening where we look at the conversations people are having around food. What are common words that are coming up? We're able to monitor after new brand launches, what are people talking about? So one of the things that's coming up a lot now is whether or not people still care about GMO. And we're actually seeing for plant-based users, the conversation declining, that they care less about it because they're more interested in good food. And that's kind of an unusual perspective. So we're trying to follow that up with other data sources as well. So social is important. We monitor a mix of Google searches, Twitter conversations, in LinkedIn, Instagram. I'm trying to get us to use Reddit a little bit more because Reddit's just harder to monitor because there's so much out there, but I think there's some interesting plant-based conversations happening there. But we triangulate that with actual sales data. So watching what people are actually buying at the register, what they're rebuying, what categories are going up, what categories are going down, brand share. So who's capturing the market. And right now we're very closely watching Beyond versus Impossible, now that Impossible is at retail. And so all those come together to actually give us a better picture of the market. And then last point, every now and then we do big studies ourselves. So big surveys, big focus groups, big interview sessions, just to add some more color to the numbers we're seeing.
And the next sort of theme of questions is asking about the geopolitical landscape and sort of risk and opportunity relating to some big changes. And one student mentions Mexico and the new law passed to put a black label on high sugar fat snacks. Another student mentioned the U.S. election and what that might mean. How do these geopolitical factors come into play in terms of your strategy? How much do you monitor what's going on there, and how much does that impact sort of day-to-day activities?
Yeah, that's a good question. There's a point. So I'll start with there's a point where you really can't monitor all the data that's out there. There's a limit. You kind of have to choose data sources that are most relevant to you. And so we have a geo expansion strategy where some regions are closer in and others are further out for a variety of reasons, both market size, regulatory, et cetera. And so we keep an eye on the geographies that are closest in for us. And so to the point about Mexico and in general, Latin America is seeing a lot of growth in plant-based food. And so we watch their labeling laws and we watch their new brands coming up quite closely. And all this to say, like, we're regularly in conversations with the regulators in these countries. So we have a great head of regulatory at Motif who has worked with these people for a long, long time. And also who has an inside line to speak to them saying, okay, what is the perspective these days? How can Motif make sure that we're managing to your expectations? And so it's very much a two-way dialogue. Because the risk is if you don't do that, you come to market and regulatory just shuts you down. And that's a frightening signal to the market. And so we keep an eye on that very closely all the way through.
And so something sort of tying both themes of questions together, what are the specific tools that your organization uses to utilize some of that data, whether from social or to monitor regulatory changes? Do you have any specific tools that you can share with the students?
So social listening, I should say, I don't know what the tool is because we use an external group who does a readout to us. They have specific tools. There's a consulting company that's known for this, and we use them for that. But other tools the best data sources are companies like Nielsen, IRI, Spins. They have point of sales data that's monitored extraordinarily closely and frequently. And so we use those sources as sales sources. Other sources that we use, things like Mintel and Euromonitor have global reach. So Euromonitor has global numbers. Mintel is really good at new products, and so that's great because they have this thing called the global new product database, where you're able to track what's new on the market, what claims, like down to what claims are on the packaging. You're able to see what claims are new and exciting. So those are some of the sources that we use. Regulation is interesting because what I've learned is that the food industry is very connected. So it really becomes a network of who you know. And so we're very lucky that our head of regulatory knows everyone in these spaces and can reach out to them. So the other thing I've learned is just food is very incestuous and everyone's connected. And everyone has worked together at various points at different companies. And so it becomes a network game as well. So Motif was interesting because when I joined, the company had only existed for 3 months. And so I was number 12 at the company. So then it wasn't even about a pivot. It was about what is the strategy, right? It was the starting point of what is this company doing? And last year was a lot of shaping that strategy and putting a stake in the ground in the direction that we're moving towards. We're at the point now that we're thinking about our Series B raise. And so coming up to a raise, you aren't going to do major strategic pivots, but our thinking we want to be prepared for is that post-raise, how do we think about other opportunities to capture and have the groundwork or the thinking in place for here are models that we've evaluated and here are other ones we think we can go after. And so it's an interesting balance between executing your current strategy, but also being open and doing research on future ideas so that when they are raised, you actually have a perspective on them.
I think I'd like to build on sort of the comment you just made around strategy literally at a startup. And you've now done it at least twice that I can see, your own startup and being there so early with Motive Foodworks. And maybe some of the more consulting kind of projects you were on with BCG, where it was much more, company had a strategy and you're trying to figure out, okay, how do we change? They don't usually use the word pivot. What are the differences between the two situations or environments?
Oh, yeah, big differences. So I think with your own startup, you are starting from a blank slate. So you are responding to the market as it stands today, and you're able to make those decisions in the moment. And there's a lot of it's a mix of terrifying, but also very freeing, and makes you feel like you can be very creative. I think when I think about BCG projects, especially the kinds of companies who are hiring consultants, pretty usually ones that have gone through a big market disruption and are facing some major issues. So they're ones where their strategy has fallen apart for different reasons. Either the market has changed around them and they didn't register it, or they didn't execute their strategy the way they expected to. And so there you're actually trying to piece out, okay, what was your strategy? Where did it fall down? Where can we pick up pieces that actually worked and continue with them? And where do we need to make major changes because the environment has changed around you? And there the issue is often convincing people that the market has changed, like bringing them new, because a lot of people are stuck in, no, when I did this strategy, this was the market. And you need to reflect on, no, the market has changed around you. Here are your real threats now, but also here are your new opportunities that we should pursue. And so opening people's minds up to entirely new market reality, which sometimes is also very scary for them.